I studied cultural studies and rhetoric, and so we were looking at the corset is growing in popularity. A corset is an item that was, of course, imposed upon women in Victorian times, or even before, through bodices, and then sort of cast off after, in the 1920s, like women were like, you're not gonna wrap me up in a corset and have me confined to your particular beauty standard. And then the corset started to resurge in the 70s with goth and Madonna, then in the 80s. Wearing it, lots of fashion designers started doing it, and people were wearing just corsets, right, or wearing corsets on the outside. Corsets, of course, are also drawn on typically female-bodied characters in comics and in other places, and then transferred sometimes from this, for cosplay in particular, from the page onto an actual body. And so I was interested in sort of the differences and the different ways that corsets were used in cosplay and in LARP, particularly because people have started wearing or attempting to wear corsets as armor, in particular if they're playing, so the corsets were going from being hyper-feminized and swoony, right, to being like, this is what a warrior wears. But if you actually try to wear a corset for more than a few hours in a LARP where you're trying to draw a bow or do these other things, it's actually now physically confining. So I wanted to say, well, why are so many people wearing corsets in LARPs now and in cosplay? And what does a corset mean rhetorically? So as a rhetorical scholar, we look at things as texts. In other words, this material object, right, of a cup is communicating, right, with people in a shorthand sort of way, and potentially is actually, there's a discussion that's happening about it, right, because you're seeing this and you're like, Starbucks, oh, right, this is not cheap coffee, right, she spends $5 a day, and then they have the whole conversation about Starbucks is not good coffee, but it is good coffee, and Starbucks is ubiquitous. I mean, all these things are coming now that you have these associations with Starbucks. So with a corset, you can have the same sort of thing where the person who's wearing it is wanting to communicate a specific thing, but what you are receiving or doing is not necessarily that. And you can play with that tension, right? But you can also, so what's happening is it's being written upon the body, and the corset is also holding in as well as projecting out, if that makes sense. So, so what I did is, let's see, it should tell us. So I did a phenomenological study where I talked to, using an online survey instrument where we had 700 and some folks respond who had worn a corset in a LARP. And I did a qualitative analysis of their narrative answers to look for similarities that would come through, like what are the kinds of concepts or key words or categories that came through. And I looked at costuming theory and previous scholarship on corsets, asked the 5 questions. Out of the 741 responses, 321 were viable and unique, but each one of those had up to 5 answers across, so there's quite a bit of data that's been analyzed here. And so I am going to analyze it based on who took the study, what are the demographics of the people who took the study, what they thought about for choosing to wear the corset, and what does the corset mean in the medium of LARP. Because does it mean something different in LARP than it means if you were to see someone wearing a corset not in a LARP? So the demographics of the response, we had the majority of the people were from the United States, right? At around blue, around 66%. But then the UK was pretty strongly represented there at 14%, and then Canada, Norway, and Sweden, and then other, right? So I had respondents from Belgium, China, Netherlands, Australia, and Turkey, but not very many of them. So it is pretty United States heavy, but it was distributed across. So we did have people from around the world to do. And the United States, predominantly the respondents appear to have come from mostly buffer campaign LARPs, because those are more prominent in the United States, but there are some who talked about wearing them in theater LARPs and parlor Larps as well. So probably not surprisingly, 84% of respondents identified as female, but we did have gender fluid or non-binary and male respondents. So it was true that corsets were most often worn by women, but can be worn by all genders. Typically, they stated that they were worn to signify female, like a shortcut, real quick, like I'm presenting female. So lots of different types of Larps. Some people talked about weekend longs, Larps of a few hours, and that the type and duration of Larp was something that they considered if they were going to wear a corset. How long am I going to be in this, right? Am I outside? Is it hot, right? All those sorts of things. So these were the 5 questions that I asked. Why do you choose to wear a corset? Or why have you in the past? How do you feel while you're wearing a corset? What factors do you consider when choosing whether or not to wear one? What's the meaning you're trying to give? What are you attempting to try to project when you're wearing it? And then how does the corset help you enact your character, if at all? And so as I went through, we'll just talk about the data and then we'll talk about the theory, right? So I went through the coding of all these answers, some 1,500 answers. Power was one of the things that emerged very strongly. Like feeling powerful or empowered. Gaining status. The corset is a status object. All that's rolled into power. Femininity, probably not surprisingly. Feeling more feminine or conventionally feminine, which was not the same as feeling sexy. Just to clarify that. Sexiness, as you can see, is the 3rd coding category. Sexy, hot, desirable, display or play with sexuality or sensuality. For reasons of comfort or discomfort. Very strongly leaning toward comfort, which may surprise some people, is that a lot of people think about corsets as being uncomfortable, but the people here who are saying that they're wearing them are saying them because they are comfortable and that they give them support, which is the next one, right? And then confidence. A lot of respondents talked about the corsets affecting their confidence level, affecting their posture. I separated attractive and beautiful out from sexiness. If I were to roll sexiness and attractive and beautiful together, like they would be just so much further above than any of the other categories. But some people noted sexiness and said nothing about feeling attractive or beautiful. And some people said they felt beautiful, but not sexy, and some people did say both. And then historical accuracy was another reason to wear it, right? Am I playing in a period Larp? Does it fit? Breathing, which is a type of restriction, but I separated that out because people often think about that. It's one of the very common things that comes up when people think about corsets. Am I going to be able to breathe? Some people want to have the sort of, I can't breathe thing because it helps them with their feeling with their character. Others were wanting to make sure that they could breathe because of very active work. Getting the correct silhouette. So that could be because of clothing, certain types of dresses or things that need to hang a certain way. The corset can help improve the way that the clothing falls on you. And then armor, and then to be in my character. Were all things that came forward from the data. So you can see from here that from the most sexiness was the #1 reason to wear a corset, followed by confidence, followed by comfort. Then posture, femininity, feeling powerful, historically accurate, and armor were the top ones. But of course, sexiness and confidence were both over 40% of respondents saying, that's why I wear a corset. So, in terms of the other considerations that they had, is it appropriate to my character, right? If it was appropriate to the character, even in the slightest, then there would be the choice to typically wear it. Like, they would say, I don't want to wear it if it's not going to fit my character. My character is either lower class, and so she wouldn't have a corset, or this is a historical time period where it really would be an anathema to wear, or an anachronism to wear the corset. But if it's going to fit at all, then these other things like feeling sexy or feeling confident or feeling comfortable, we're going to trump that. Then considering the amount of physical activity that I'm going to be in, how much I need to sit or stand was also something that came out, because sitting is more difficult in the corset. So if you were playing in a situation where you had to stand a lot, then they were feeling more able to wear the corset. Was it accurate to the setting? Physical comfort included things like weather and how well the corset fit, too. Because if it's really, really hot, some people would decide maybe not to wear the corset. If it was planning to be cold, they talked about the corset as an insulating layer. So it was pretty neat that way. But here's corsets as an alibi, right? So a corset is a physical object that creates the alibi of character. And it immediately physically enacts that separation from player to character, right? It's visceral and it's physical. So like when you put the corset on and you lace it up, right, you can feel that it's still there, right? And that feeling of it being there constantly, even though it's going to fade some in your mind, but you can then you move and you're like, oh yeah, there's the corset. And so it's like corset equals character, right? In a lot of ways, like the corset says, I need to remember that I need to speak this way or hold this sort of bearing, and I'm not me. I'm not myself. It changes your body language and your comportment, right? It tends to have your back. So not only does it help support your back, but it puts you in a different posture than you would necessarily be in, which also reinforces character. And can lead then to it can then cause you to change how you interact with others. So if you were here in the corset, and then you were like, I am being a lady, and I'm going to now look down upon you, right? Or I'm going to go, and since it might affect my breathing, it's also going to change how I speak, or those sorts of things. So it actually creates a new body. So I'd like to introduce this theoretical concept, two things. One is the meta text. So as I talked a little bit about that, so it's a text that's between, right? It's a text that is being a relay switch, And the palimpsest, some of you might know the word palimpsest is used from art, where a painter who usually didn't have enough money to buy more canvases would take a painting that they didn't really like and paint literally over top of the other painting, and so there was the thing underneath. There's the surface painting and the thing underneath. So I'm suggesting that the corset is a palimpsest in that it is presenting one thing with the other underneath in a very physical sort of way, right? So character in corset, player's body behind corset, right? And there's some interesting theory about that comes from uniforms. So, for example, being a cop in a bulletproof vest is much like a corset, right, in this thing. But as soon as you put the uniform of the cop on, the person disappears to an extent and the cop is present, right? Or the military person is present, or the nurse is present, right? Uniform. So looking at uniform theory, corsets do this same sort of thing. And they talk about it, particularly with the military or positions of authority, the business suit, right? These things, is that when they go on, they are encasing or hardening the body in the sense that now I am a figure of authority, right? With this military uniform on and things. And so corsets appear to be doing the same thing in Larps with this encasing, and it's coded almost as a uniform that is saying power, right? So the character's body now exists as a result of the corset. But corsets are the sign of duality, duplicity, right? So corset as an oppressive device, right? It restricts movement, it restricts your breathing, it denotes being a proper female, right? It imposes rules on the person who's wearing it, right? What can I do, right? If you've seen Underworld, the movie with Kate Beckinsale, I don't know, she wears a corset over top of a catsuit, which is a whole nother thing. Let's get that. But she is, one of my favorite scenes in that is like her lover, Michael's been attacked, and it's at the end, and she's trying to lean down to like cradle him and to go, and she can't bend because of the corset, right? And so like she's got one knee up out here like this, and she's trying to struggle down and hold him because she's restricted in the movements there. But also culturally, what does a proper woman do? But then corsets are empowering in that they can be hypersexualizing and draw all your attention, but they set this boundary, very physical boundary to do this, like, okay, look, but don't touch, right? So in this they become radical and powerful and transgressive, badass, right? And they do emphasize, that's their point, right? And they do very often emphasize what were hypersexualized areas. That's why they were originally invented. The man was like, let's push up the boobs and make the butt bigger, right? But what's happening if you're using them in cosplay or in LARP is that you have the social contract of the game or the social contract of the cosplay that's saying, I am safe because I am in character, but also we have the social contract of how we're going to interact with each other. And like if I were to do or wear this in public, people will behave differently to me than they will behave in the game, because in the corset it means these things. So for a lot of the women who answered the survey, a lot of the people who answered the survey, it was like, I get to do these things and I'm safe. Like you can, so widely used, they make the player feel empowered, sexy and beautiful. Corsets worn on the outside of the costume denote differently than corsets that are still worn underneath, right? The fact of showing them out is much more empowering. Also, corset, I mean, what people are using corsets for also in costuming is to make an otherwise not exciting outfit look better, right? So it's like I have this sort of plain shirt and plain pair of pants, but if I get this fabulous leather or brocade corset and I put it on top of it, then like now I have a costume. Look at the corset, don't look at how cheap my shirt is. Right? And so we also had a lot of interesting things about one corset is not another corset, right? So you can't necessarily elide all corsets. Leather corsets very much were armor, right? Brocade or lacy corsets were going to denote something different. How well made was the corset? I'd love to do a follow-up study that starts looking at corset policing, because I think it does exist, just like other costume polices have. So, yep, I've kind of went over this. So instead of being a patriarchal control foisted upon women, some people wear them for that reason, because they want to play with that. What did it feel like to be the swooning woman, right? And to not be able to do. And so people talked about using the corset to help them feel smaller or more historical, but in most cases they were moving the other direction. Limitations, I could repeat this. I did have 8 countries. Study indicates that, like the terms queer or nigga, women in particular are reclaiming and defining what the corset means, right? They're like, you guys told me what it meant, now we're going to say what it means. Materiality, I just talked about that, how it was constructed. The over and under bust corsets can potentially have different meanings because of the way they contain. There is also a very interesting waist training movement that is gaining lots of traction. Women that are wearing corsets, not necessarily in LARPs and other things, but to get a smaller waist and to reshape their bodies, move their rib cages and things to do. Corsets, particularly as being out of time or out of context, would be another really interesting further study to take a look at, because if you're wearing them for these other reasons. And then this is one of the big takeaways, right? The corset is meant to show that the madam is attractive, but unattainable and even protected from unwanted physical attention, right? And so, which is fascinating. The whole thing was just fascinating. So where are we on time?
We're pretty good.
Okay.
Maybe a minute.
Maybe a minute, okay. Not so much. Because I could go into heavier theory type stuff, but we can also talk about that in questions. So I think that's it then.